Hey, something G, just meant for you. Check the vibe, hey. I just ball of my soul and try to fit it in the plastic of the pen as it bleeds on the paper from the madness that I'm in playing.
How's everybody doing? Welcome back to another episode of Copper Colored Peoples of the Mid-South. I am your host, Gilly Galathiel, also known as Lethal Gills for Good Son, and this is Divinely Decoded. Sorry for my absence. I've been getting my mind right, my body right, and my spirit right with the Creator. And this will be dedicated to one of my subscribers from Yazoo, Mississippi. The whole channel is mostly about uncovering the history of the Mid-South Delta and parts of the Southeast for the American Negro that was held captive when the colonizers got over here. So this is, kind of dedicated to her, and I kind of forgot her name, but if she ever comes across this video, please be sure to leave your name and comment in the description. Tell me, did you get any information out of here that was useful to you and your people, or just to the area of the Yazoo city in general. Shouts out to the Yazoo city, the people there. Shouts out to the whole Delta, Mid-South, main artery where this Mississippi River at, the peoples and ancient villages and tribes and nations that bordered this whole area right here. We are a very, very special and unique people. And as the truth gets revealed, we're going to start to know more of that. Now, as you can tell by the title of the video, this is The Lost Tribes of the Delta, Children of Yah, Enslaved and Reclassified, how the enslavement of the American Negro is identical to the treatment of the Hebrews who were brought over as African slaves. And really they were African Hamites and Shemite mixed people, coming from when Shem spilled some of his descendants over into the Middle East after the flood, or the separation of man from the spirit world. The western region of the hemisphere is technically the spiritual world, and the eastern region of the hemisphere is the physical world or material world. And the Mississippi River kind of divides these two worlds from apart. Is the Americas the forgotten region of Shem descendants, the last tribes of Israel? Because you will see, and the evidence further shows, that the American Indian to the northeast and southeast of North Americas were captured, enslaved, relocated, and reclassified as freed men, free blacks, or free color. Now we're going to get into this, and I'm going to let the research speak for itself, and you'll see, the truth in it, okay? And remember, all of the Father's people, if you read the book of truth, the Bible, okay, which is, spiritual man's understanding for the physical or material modern world that we're in, okay? This is spiritual man's understanding of the physical and material world that we're currently in, okay? So with that being said, all of the Father's children or his people still bears his name or his identity or his nature, some way, shape, or form, in their identity, okay? So with that being said, let's get into it. And we start off, talking about the Yazoo people. The Yazoo Indians were a Native American tribe belonging to the Tunica linguistic group, historically residing along the lower Yazoo River in what is now the Mississippi Delta, closely related to other Tunica-speaking peoples like the Colonial and Tunica tribes. The name Yazoo comes from the river they lived near, and the tribe is believed to have become extinct. Okay, they are believed to have become extinct around 1740. So in the 1700s, they supposed to just, magically disappeared, right? But we're going to show that they didn't disappear, right? They didn't disappear. They actually were captured, enslaved, relocated, and reclassified as freed men, free blacks, or free colored, okay? Depending on whoever enslaved them and wherever they freed them. Okay, and it goes on to talk about some key points about the Yazoo Indians. Location primarily lived along the lower Yazoo River in Mississippi. We're going to go over that area and talk about that area as well. Linguistic group, part of the Tunica language family, closely related to the Colonial and Tunica tribes. We're going to go over the Tunica Providence. That was an empire of the Mississippi Delta River. Origin of the name, the Yazoo, comes from the Yazoo River where they reside, but you're going to also see this name comes from another distinction. Historical events They fought alongside the Colonial against the French during the Natchez War, okay, against a tribe that was hired by the French, against a politically allied recognized tribe that was hired by the French, okay. Extinction. The Yazoo tribe is considered to have become extinct around 1740, okay. So let's talk about the lower Mississippi Delta and just the Mississippi Delta region in general. Now I'm in the book Knights of Spain, Warriors of the Sun, and we're gonna go to the 11th chapter, and we're gonna go to the part where they talk about the Mississippi Delta. And it says, the Mississippi Valley has been powerfully shaped by the magnificent river that runs through it. The Mississippi River, together with its tributaries, the Missouri, Ohio, Arkansas, and Red, drains a vast area of the North American continent. Okay, so this river drains a vast area of the North American continent. They call this river the main artery of this land. So extremely important, you know, literally, physically, and spiritually. It is one of the largest rivers in the world, and when it floods, particularly in spring and early summer, it can wreak havoc with the land in one place, eroding it away, virtually dissolving it, only to bless other areas as its muddy waters. You hear that? Muddy waters. Who recognize that name? Shout outs to the Delta, man. Shouts out to the MidSouth, man. We them. You hear me? We them. I promise you we are them. The Mississippi River acquired its meandering habits by about 4000 BC, okay, before Christ, or before civilization as we know it, and it has frequently changed its course sinuously like a giant serpent. Remember in my last video when I talked about this side of the river where Arkansas is located, that would be the northeast, okay, and southeast part of Arkansas, where the northeast and northwestern part of Arkansas is where the Sioux Indian nation covered all of that ground, or the Sioux Indian ethnicity type. This is an Indian ethnicity, I'm sorry, but the Sioux Indian ethnicity covered all of this ground, from the northeast all the way up to the northwest, going all the way up to the Midwest, and finishing out upper west. And so Sioux means little snake, okay? And they, the Sioux, they ancestrally start in Mississippi, the Mississippi Delta. So they get that name from the Mississippi's meandering habits, that frequently change its course sinuously like a giant serpent. And they have this symbol where they, shave their heads bald, and only leave a tail to symbolize the snake. And the head receives the waters of wisdom. So everything is aligned. It's a spiritual alignment. They're aligning themselves with everything that has a spiritual representation and meaning to it. Please understand that. The West is the spirit world, or the land of Shem, okay, who's the most spiritual. This is biblically, literally what's occurring spiritually, or metaphysically over here in the Western Hemisphere, so the eastern part of, the hemisphere of the world will be considered the physical world. Let's just keep going. It's going to tell its truth itself, okay? The Mississippi River has meandered over a deep fan of alluvial soil that has been deposited in the valley over the course of many thousands of years, okay? So thousands of years, this river been doing this in this area, or just operating like this, period. The Mississippi, like other meandering rivers in the southeast, had characteristic ways of behaving that made certain parts of the Mississippi Valley ideally suited to the Mississippian way of life. Okay. Above all, the Mississippi Valley has been shaped by the fact that the river follows a characteristically S-shaped course across a deep bed of deposits of soft soil. Thus, in the outside of a bend in the river, the water runs fast, continually erodes the bank on that side, which constantly recedes outward. This is the part of the river that has the deepest water. In contrast, on the inside of the bend, the water runs slowest. In fact, on the inside of the bend, eddies sometimes flow gently upriver. And here the water is the shallowest, Water-tolerant willow trees normally grow on the inside of a bend. As time goes on and as erosion proceeds, the loop of the bend becomes longer and longer, and in time it comes to have a very narrow neck. Then particularly when it floods, the force of the river may cut a new channel through this narrow neck, creating for a time a C-shaped side channel surrounding an island. Okay, now picture all of this description in your mind. What you're gonna start to see as you picture in your mind, the movie Avatar, The Way of Water, they're kind of explaining this, representing the spiritual world that man is in metaphysically. They're doing, fantasy like to kind of throw you off, but it's a real people, who live in spirit and are walking in spirit all the time, and they align themselves with their likeness that's in nature and within the elements so they can obey the force of the Father naturally. That's why our Indian is naturally obedient, naturally resilient, naturally compassionate, naturally wise. It's because from ancestrally being accustomed to a spiritual world, they can't break away from that. All right. So I'm just putting this in your mind so you can understand what you're reading and what you're looking at in real time. But we're going to keep going on. The Mississippi, often called the muddy Mississippi, carries a great load of soil and sediment. When it floods and its waters leave their banks, the heaviest depositions of the coarsest particles precipitate out along the edges of the river, forming natural levees, gently sloping ridges and 15 to 25 feet high and as much as a mile wide that run parallel to the course of the river. If you have a town that's by the river here in the Delta, you're in a town that's that's right up against the banks of the Mississippi River in the Delta, you see all of this what this here is talking about. I'm pretty sure, because we see it all day here in Helton, West Helton. This same process of heavy deposition occurs at the open ends of the cut-off C-shaped bends of the river, so that in a short time they silt up and become C-shaped oxbow lakes. These oxbow lakes are scattered throughout the Mender zone of the Mississippi River, and they were extraordinarily attractive to Mississippian people. Here we go, y'all. The soil of the levee ridges was remarkably rich. Okay, the soil of the levee ridges were remarkably rich, superb for growing corn, and because it was sandy, it was easy to till with simple tools. These farmsteads, they still here, y'all. It's still set up the same way. The landscaping is still mostly set up the same way. The geography is still set up the same way. The people still almost the same way, or, operate the same. It's still the same, y'all. An added feature was the aquatic resources of the Oxbow Lakes provided a bountiful supply of frogs, turtles, fish, and seasonal waterfowl, and in an area so subject to flooding, an elevation of any sort was an attractive place to build a house or a town. That's exactly like Helton, West Helton. I'm sure some places in the Yazoo or neighborhoods in the Yazoo city or any cities here in the Mid-South Mississippi Delta, I bet they all look like what I just explained to you. Houses on attractive elevated platforms and sunken embankments, or in some places they just on earthen mounds and hills just everywhere. And then it goes on to say a further consequence of the constant aggradation of the Mississippi River, perhaps abetted by occasional earthquakes, is that some areas of the delta became sunk lands, vast swamps. Some of these sunk lands are quite large and are normally covered year-round by the shallow expanse of the standing water. Two sub-regions within the Mississippi Valley, the Central Mississippi Valley, okay, that's in Arkansas, and the Yazoo Basin supported exceptionally large Mississippian chiefdoms. Okay, the two Mississippi valleys is the one they're talking about. Central Mississippi Valley, that's coming to the western, pouring into Arkansas. That's up here where Phillips County is located. And the lower Mississippi Valley is where Yazoo is located. Okay, these two sections of the Delta were heavily occupied by chiefdoms, y'all. And both of these sub-regions within the valley were heavily occupied, like how they is now. The Central Valley is principally located on the western side of the Mississippi, stretching for 500 miles from the mouth of the Ohio River to the mouth of the Arkansas River. It is divided into eastern and western parts by Crowley's Ridge. West Helton is to the west and Helton is to the east. Lakeview is to the west, Elaine is to the east. Helena and Elaine is the same name. there are Hellenized Greek names. You're gonna follow you're gonna follow this, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're gonna understand. It is divided into eastern and western parts by Crowley's Ridge, a long and narrow erosional remnant that runs from north to south, an elevated area supporting a strip of mixed hardwood forest and an ocean of southern floodplain forest. So this is just like a big earthen mountain, like a giant earth mountain at the top that just filled with forests and stuff at the top. It's like a big earth mountain, you know, that's separating West Helena from the rest of the part that enters on into western Arkansas. On the eastern side of Crowley's Ridge, the St. Francis River runs southward, emptying into the Mississippi River near present-day Helena, Arkansas. The western margin of the Central Valley lies against the Ozark Mountains on the west and is drained by the White River, which empties into the Arkansas River near its junction with the Mississippi. The eastern part of the western margin of the Central Valley lies against the Ozark Mountains on the west and is drained by the White River, which empties into the Arkansas River near its junction with the Mississippi. The eastern part of the central Mississippi Valley lies in the geologically younger Mender zone of the Mississippi River, and it was exceptionally favored by native people. The Yazoo Basin or Yazoo Bison lies on the eastern side of the Mississippi River, running from an area just south of present-day Memphis down to Vicksburg. It compromises the area between the Mississippi River and the bluff hills of the state of Mississippi. From up there in Memphis to Vicksburg, all the way down to Yazoo, these were heavily occupied, empires, chiefdoms, and villages. So you can just imagine like how they're 15,000 people here in this one city, a few thousand here in this city, a few thousand in that city, a few thousand, how they got these, towns and counties divided up. They, put these on top of already divided, towns and villages and providences and empires or whatever. It was already heavily occupied. It was already, sanctioned off, organized, divided, whatever you want to call it. And when you read the research, it's going to tell you what happened to them and what's going on. The Yazoo River area, or just the Delta area, period. Now, I told you that Yah, or the Father of heaven and earth, the Great Spirit, he labels, all his children with his identity, right? So when you see the name Yazoo, what does Yazoo mean in Indian? Well, according to, the AI search engine, and we're decoding this is divinely decoded, y'all. So, but anyway, mysteriously, the Yazoo Native Americans became extinct about 1740. Okay, we know that, and the meaning of Yazoo has remained a puzzle. Some say it means river of death. Others suggest that it means hunting ground. Yashu. Y'all see that? Yashu. So instead of Yazoo, it's really Yashu. Or they're trying to say Yashua. And we already know, or those that don't know, Ham is the progenitor of the dark races, but not the Negroes. Shem is the progenitor of the Negroes. And just because, physical man from the physical world over in the eastern region, encountered or had some Shemite groups over there with them in the Middle East, all of Shem's descendants were there. It was only a few. So they like to interpret this as, the lost tribes and this and that, but what is a Hebrew? A Hebrew has to be an Indian, or Israelites has to be an Indian, or the Jews have to be Indian descent if they're tribal people. A tribe are Indians, and these people are distinctively, accounted in the Middle East, in that part between Africa and Asia. But everyone knows that the Western Hemisphere was already filled with Negroes. They enslaved them and colonized them and traded them and did all kind of other things with them. So with that being said, we can already infer that, all of Shem descendants were probably still or are still in the Western Hemisphere. they just got accounted for over there because physical man or the material man in the physical world recorded and wrote history as he saw it or as he seen fit. When he came to the West, he had to change a lot of his, thinking or, his knowledge, or adjust a lot of that to what was already going on over here. But these people been over here for thousands of years as he was operating over there for some time. But they want to disregard that. But you're going to see that that's what's going on. So the linguistic group that they were a part of, the Tunica people, let's see about the Tunica Providence. Now, it said that, they joined the Colonial, the Sioux, and the Natchez, the Yazoo did, to go against the French. But they are ancestrally linked to the Tunica Providence. I told you the Tunica Providence is the province that, was politically dominant here in the Delta. They covered all ground of city, towns, and villages that bordered the Mississippi. So like make a circle around the Mississippi Delta where the river is. And that was the province of Tunica. So Tunica up into the 1700s, local tribes included the Akalapissa, Biloxi, Pascagoula tribes on the Gulf Coast. Okay, so this at the bottom where the Gulf, this is at the bottom where the Gulf open. The Bayogula, the Houma, and Natchez tribes on the lower Mississippi. So this is going up from the Gulf, Louisiana, Mississippi, parts of Texas is. So as they going up, the Chakachiuma, the Ipatapa, the Koror, the Ofagula, the Tapasa, the Sioux, the Tunica, and the Yazoo tribes on the Yazoo River in the Mississippi Delta. So this is going up to where Yazoo City is and on further up to where Phillips County is. So these are all of the tribes of the Tunica Providence, or all of the tribes here in the Delta area that were in these chiefdoms and kingdoms that was here in the Mississippi Valley. So what happened to them? And this is at the JSTOR.org. It's a journal of social history, and it's by Michael Goska of Davidson College, and it's titled "To Do or to Do Some Good Upon Their Countrymen, the Paradox of Indian Slavery in Early Anglo-America." So now y'all finna learn what happened to all these unknown and lost tribes or unacknowledged tribes. In the wake of the Pequot War in New England in 1637, 17 Pequot Indians, 15 boys, and 2 women were ordered to be sent out of New England by Massachusetts officials. Hundreds of captives have been taken by the English Puritans as a result of the colonists' triumphs in battle at the Mystique and the Great Swamp. Subsequently, many Pequot men were put to death, while others were divided up among the soldiers, given to the Narragansetts, or assigned to the Connecticut or Massachusetts colonies. The 17 women and boys, however, were placed on board the Salem-built craft of Captain Pierce, earmarked for sale in the remote Atlantic islands of Bermuda. So they taking Pequot Indian men to the Atlantic islands of Bermuda. For some reason, Captain Pierce missed his landing and continued on, so he bypassed that and went further out into the West Indies, y'all. He taking Indians, or, indigenous Americans, right, against their will to other places, regions. Once there, Pierce deposited his cargo, on the tiny Puritan outpost off to the coast of Nicaragua at Providence Island, where, by a stroke of the Providence Islands Company's pen, the rebel Pequots, you hear me, by a stroke of Providence Island Company's pen, the slave company, the rebel Pequots were transformed into cannibal Negroes. So they were taken from where they were identified as Indian or indigenous people and taken to the Providence Island and their slave company and were transformed by the pen, pencil whipping. That's what pencil whipping come from. It come from the counterpart itself, because we have no enemies. If you're an enemy of Negro people, you are an enemy of the Most High, because these are his chosen people. So we have no enemies. This is no hostility. I wish no bad on any of these people. I wish good and the best of luck to, our brothers of Ham and our brothers of Japhet, because, they're our brothers. One has to follow us and one reflect and model everything after us, So I love y'all, You can hate me all you want, or you can do whatever you want, but the creator gonna have the last laugh. But anyway, if you see what's going on, you can clearly see that these people get, reclassified in a whole new identity, once these, colonists came upon the land, and it goes on to say that, after they transformed them into cannibal Negroes, they were condemned to serve out their lives in slavery in Anglo-America's first true slave society. So the first slave business was started with indigenous people who, once they became enslaved, were written or identified as Negro. Listen to this, y'all. Indian slavery has become a subject of great interest to scholars in recent years, though the most important works have focused on the 18th century in the Anglo-Spanish or Anglo-French borderlands. New scholarship has been particularly important because of the willingness of historians to treat slavery less as a static institution into which Indians were poured by imperial officials and labor-starved planters, and more as cultural construction that emerged as a result of negotiations between Europeans and indigenous people. That means the Europeans hired indigenous people that were rulers and ruled over men and women, to capture and subdue their own people so they can move them to the west so that people from the east can settle in the east. The people from the Middle East and from the west, like western parts of the Eastern Hemisphere, they settled in like-minded climate and such. So they sent them over here first, to gather up all the people and take them west with them, because these are the spiritual people of this land. So the people that were originally on the east, they brung them all to the west or sent them to these other Indian slave companies. As a result, historians have effectively reconceptualized Indian slavery, and unfortunately, scholarship on the enslavement of Indians during the earliest decades of Anglo-American settlement has not evolved apace. The record of the small shipload of Pequot Indians, for example, is a familiar piece of early Anglo-American history that may appear in a number of contexts. Some scholars rightly employ this event to demonstrate the constancy of the classical notion that individuals captured in a just war could be justly enslaved. Others, however, see in the story an early example of something new coming to fruition in the colonies, such as the creeping encroachment of plantation slavery among the English in the Americas and the racialization of non-European peoples that was ongoing early in the 17th century and would only intensify with time. Colonial slavery in North America was a central part of the economy and involved the enslavement of indigenous people and Africans. I'm going to decode this. The indigenous peoples, you already know, are the American Shemite Negro, who were still on the Western Hemisphere after, the flood or separation. The African that they're mentioning, is the Hamite and Shemite mix that spilled over into the Middle East when the separation occurred, and also black Hamites or black elites that would be, the Jews. You can tell who's Caucasian, the European, that's more than likely probably black, a black elite, or Gentile, Christian, or whatever. The English, these are Caucasians. Dutch, some are, I'm pretty sure, black, but the English, these are Caucasians. And other nations have Caucasians in them as well. But a lot of these are the black people that were elite over there in the East. So this is why they're using the term African. When Europeans established colony, when Europeans established colonies in North America, they enslaved indigenous people to help develop their economies. Indigenous people suffered from important disease, which led to massive population losses. This is the American Negro. When they came over here, they got the American Negro from the East and used him, enslaved him, and, you know, shortened his number or put him in disarray so they can move all undesirables to the West for the land that they wanted. They wanted the land to the East because they were from the East. They weren't going to settle in the West. And because they are the holders of truth, you know, this is man who created a material world from the physical world to the East. He knows what this place is over here, and he knows who the people are. So he wanted to push them to a section where they all be identified and they all could, you know, operate, you know, in their essence. He didn't want them, you know, basically how they kicked out a lot of their people. They were undesirables. They didn't want undesirables to the East because they wanted to bring the material world to the physical world in the East. So they took all the spiritual people of this land and pushed them to the West, where spiritual people belong according to their knowledge. Now, it said African enslavement. The first enslaved Africans arrived in Jamestown in 1619. This is the 1600s. In the 1500s, the Spanish and, you know, did military raids and campaign along the southeast and, you know, whatever. The French, you know, come to, you know, do missionary work. All right. The French job was to conquer the ideology and the philosophy, conquer the mind. The Spanish job was to conquer the land and the people. They did all of this for, you know, the European, or for the Europeans that were coming over here. That the Yazoo, they said the Yazoo, right? What happened to them and all the other surrounding tribes they were with? Well, in the 18th century, at this time, the Yazoo, like the Chickasaw, were under the influence of English traders from Carolina on the Atlantic coast. In 1702, the Yazoo aided the Coureur in killing the French priest Nicholas Foucault and his 3 companions. The seminary temporarily withdrew Fort Antoine from the area. In 1718, the French established a fort near the village of Saint Pierre to command the river. In 1722, the young Jesuit priest Jean Raoul was given the Yazoo mission near the French post. He worked there until the outbreak of the Natchez revolt. So they on some revolution stuff. They trying to get rid of the foreigner that's, you know, trying to take over their land and take over their people. At that time, the Yazoo and Coureur joined with the Natchez in attacking the French colonists in attempt to drive them out of the region altogether. Now, if you in tune with the research, and as you will see when I make more videos, by the time that this happened, the Yazoo Coureur joined with the Natchez because most of the Tunica Providence had already left and moved down to Louisiana. They already, you know, accepted a treaty with the government, made a deal, and went ahead and dipped before it got real hot. So this is why the leftover tribes are banding together, because the French colonists, you know, it is in an attempt to drive them out of the region altogether, because they already got of the major province in the Delta. That was the Tunica people. They moved them down south to Louisiana, which is actually where they ancestrally come from. So a promised people, you know, these are the promised lands of a promised people. People already know where to go and move around when it get too hot. They naturally do that, you know. Anyway, look at the Bible about exoduses and, you know, mass migrations and things of that nature. That stuff, you know, is almost always played out over here some type of way when you do the research of the people and the land and their regions and things like that, their history. They'll always talk about when something get too bad or gets overwhelmed or things of that nature, or their medicine men or holy men receive revelation and tell them that it's time to move around, this and that. All of this stuff is very biblical. All of it. The nature of the Indian is extremely biblical. The nature of the European is extremely literal. On November 29th, 1729, the Natchez attacked Fort Rizzoli, killing more than 200 people, including the Jesuit priest Paul du Poisson. They carried off as captives most of the French women and children and their African slaves. Understand, these African slaves with these French women and children, these could be French black people. They're French Europeans, so they could be French blacks. The African slaves, all right, these African slaves are Hebrew and Hamite mix. They're calling them African because they have ties to Egypt. And this, is where man got his first knowledge. He got his first knowledge from the Egyptians, the physical man. The spiritual man was still over here. Some of the spiritual men from over here, spilled over into the Middle East and started teaching physical man, which gave physical man, the idea to create a material world. Please understand this. This is divinely decoded. We're going to break all the spells, all the chains. I have to let y'all know what these things really mean, okay? On learning of the event, the Yazoo Koror on December 11th, 1729, waylaid and killed Raoul and his black slave. All right. So Raoul could have been, like I said, a French black man who had a Hebrew and Hamite descended as a slave. These are the Negroes that they would like to bring birth to a material world, because not only does he carry the light, but he can show you how to reflect it because he's mixed with Hamite. So these people, that's why, in the East, all of the teachings come from the Hebrews, because the Hebrews are of the spiritual people, and the spiritual people are from the West. They gave life to the material world because they mixed with a Hamite, or they was teaching, Hamites and Gentiles over there, carnal men, about the spirit. And the only way they can understand it is if it was given to them literally, which gave them, power to give birth to the material world. They brung that material world and put it on the East, where they are from, because the Mississippi waters divides the spirit world from the physical world. That's why when they came over here, the chiefs to the southeast, they were the most politically dominant, because they were the most physically dominant, because they were the chiefs of the physical world. The land or the region of the Cherokee, the region of the Chickasaw, the region of the Choctaw, the region of the Creek. These are dominant regions, enormous political regions that they control, because they were the first man of the physical world that was to the east when the Mississippi River was established or created. This is divinely decoded, y'all. This is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. The tribes buried Raoul's body. His bell and some books were afterward recovered and restored to the French by the Quapaw. Another priest, Stephen Dutrelli, or Dutrelu, he was attacked on January 1st, 1730, but was able to escape. Now, this is what happened to the Yazoo people and all of the tribes that you saw, that are all of these tribes that were part of the Tunica Providence. The Natchez War of 1729 was a disaster for French settlements in Louisiana. The colonists withdrew in retreat to New Orleans. It was also a disaster for the Natchez and Yazoo. The French allied with the Choctaw, okay? They allied with the Choctaw, one of the 5 civilized tribes, okay? Bounty hunters, new recruits for retaliation, and overwhelmingly defeated the Natchez and Yazoo. They sold survivors into slavery on Caribbean plantations. The Chickasaw captured many other Yazoo men and sold them into slavery to the Carolina-based traders. All right, this ended the Yazoo as a tribe. Their survivors intermarried with the Chickasaws, the Hamite and Shemite mixed Middle Eastern Negroes, and other peoples. Okay, so you already know that the Caribbean and the Carolinas are the epicenters for slaves and Negro slaves, or people that you saw pencil whipped into Negro slaves. So what you think happened to these Natchez, the Yazoo, the Ofagula, and all those other tribes that were in the Tunica Providence when, they was having this outbreak of this war with the French? They got enslaved by the Choctaws and the Chickasaws, who married them, or, who intermarried with them, put them into slavery, and, freed them as a whole nother type, a whole nother people. This article here is called An Ancestry of African Native Americans. Using government documents, author Angela Walton Raji traced her ancestors to the slaves owned by American Indians. And this is something that probably is in everybody's family here in the Arkansas and Mississippi Delta, MidSouth, the nature of the attributes of what's going on with her family. Now, it said Angela Walton Raji has been researching African Native American genealogy for nearly 20 years, and this is about the book Black Indian Genealogy: Research African American Ancestors Among the 5 Civilized Tribes. They're called they were civilized because they took up the nature of the European, who is material. They was telling them, you see what you did to this world? Imagine what you can do to our world. Brainwashing, manipulating type of thing. She recently presented a series of genealogy workshops at the National Museum, the American Indian, Washington, D.C., in conjunction with the exhibit of Indivisible African Native American Lives in the Americas. It goes on to talk about Walton Raji's ancestors are freedmen, African Americans who were slaves of the 5 civilized tribes. Now, are they really African American, or are they just American? Because they could just be Americans, like those Pequots who got pencil whipped into being cannibalistic Negroes. And I told you, this African tag, this is the Hamite and Shemite. Anybody that they use for the term slavery was an African and a Shemite. Servitude, these were just blacks, undesirables that got kicked out by those imperialists over there. So they got kicked out to come make a life for themselves, because they got tired of them being around, and where they dominating it. So they know who the slaves were, and they knew who they wanted to separate from. Okay? Once the throne got white, once the church got white, once the seat got white, anybody of color had to get out. You could have been a black elite. You could have been a black Dutchman. You could have been a black Jewish pirate. You could have been an artist. You could have been a painter. Whoever you was, the same black elites here today are the same black elites that were overseas. They came over here and got cut off from their nation. So they're no longer French. They're no longer Spanish. They're no longer Dutch. They got cut off, politically from these nations. When they came over here, they became black. These black people came over here with Caucasians who were undesirables too. They were, Gentiles. Their slaves, or the people that they had that they called slaves, were the Hebrew and Hamite mixed from the Middle East, who the Africans and all of them was trying to, subdue, and bring over here, because they were the ones who were going to bring light to their material world once they brung them back to a spiritual world. They knew where their ancestor was from. And they wanted to separate, the Western Negro from the Eastern Negro. So they pushed all of the Negroes from the West that were already over here to the western side of the Mississippi, y'all. The Cherokee, the Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole nations in Indian Territory, which became Oklahoma in 1907, the Cherokee freed their slaves in 1863. And after the Civil War, the other tribes did the same, all but the Chickasaw eventually granted freedmen full citizenship in their tribe in preparation for Oklahoma statehood. The U.S. Congress created the Dawes Commission, which was charged with dissolving collective tribal land ownership and allotting land to individual tribal members. Thousands of freedmen came before the commission to prove their tribal membership and their right to share of land. Now, she goes on and talked about what spurred you to start researching African Native American history and genealogy. This is what I was talking about, that this probably reminds you of a lot of your journey in the Delta. If anybody in the Delta, had any relation with their grandparents who spoke about their Indian ancestry, this would probably be familiar to you, what she gets to talking about. She goes on and she says, I was inspired to begin the research because it's part of my family history. I'm originally from western Arkansas and eastern Oklahoma, right there on the border. My great-grandmother, Sally Walton, was born in Indian Territory. Arkansas is Arkansas, so this is basically Holy Land. That's why they put Indian country next to the Holy Land, because once they got over here, they were really considered, good. Once you crossed the Mississippi, you were good, but you had to get across the Mississippi. If you reached, Indian country, that's even better. But you good once you cross, because once you cross, you was automatically in Holy Land. Like the refuge place in the Bible. That's what Arkansas was. It was a refuge place. Once anybody got there, they was on Holy Land. You really can't mess with them like that. So this goes on to say, I'm just divinely decoding things, breaking them down for you. But when I tell a story, it should remind you of yours if you are from and in the Delta and grow up on Indian ancestry in your family. It goes on to say, what did she find? She said that she found a Choctaw Nation enrollment card for Samuel and Sally Walton, my great grandparents. And then my grandfather, Sam Jr., was recorded there. My uncle Houston's name was there. My aunt Louisa's name. I was like, wow, I didn't realize there was a document that reflected this. On the reverse side of that same card, which was the next exposure on microfilm, was information about Sam and Sally's parents. Here was additional information about his mother, his father, and her father. There were 4 new ancestors. But beyond that, I also found an interview with my great-grandmother and great-grandfather about their life in the Choctaw Nation. I had known of Samuel Walton, but did not realize he was originally born in Arkansas and had later been sold as a slave to someone in the Choctaw Nation. I also began to recognize surnames of people whom I had grown up around. I realized here's an entire record set reflecting people who had been slaves of Choctaw Indians, many of whom had Choctaw blood, an entire record set of African American people that had been talked about. Talked about, were they really Africans or were they really Indian? She said these interviews took place in the 1890s and slavery officially ended in 1866 in the territory. The reverse side of the enrollment card is the name of the person's parents, the father's tribal enrollment, the name of the father's slave owner, if the father had been enslaved. In many cases, particularly in the Choctaw Nation and Chickasaw Nation, watch this, you'll find that the father was actually an Indian. Then the name of the person's mother and her tribal enrollment, and the name of the mother's slave owner, if on one side of the card you have a husband, his wife, and their children, and on the reverse side you get the names of their parents, that means you have 3 generations on one card.